Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen here with CCJ 3701, Research Methods in Criminology. So we're going to start drafting your discussion section and conclusion. So this is kind of I think the best part about doing research. So now all the heavy lifting is done. You've done an abstract, you've done figures, built tables, you've done all your results, you've recoded variables, you've written all the results up, you've done a method section, you've done a theory section, you did a literature review. You are now 90% done with your paper, so that's got to feel pretty good. So now you're moving into the very last section, which is the discussion and conclusion section. After this, you're just formatting and editing, and that's it. So I want you to feel accomplished at this point in time. You've done a lot of work, and you've done all the heavy lifting stuff. So now it's easy street. You're kind of on the downward slope and finishing up the final business of the paper so that you can submit it and have it be turned in. This is probably my favorite section to write, to be quite honest, is discussion and conclusion, because I get closure from it. I get to resolve all my ideas. I get my answer to my question. Does divorce really impact delinquency, or does immigration status really impact arrest? I know the answer to that now. I have a result. So I'm feeling pretty settled about that question. Now I get to kind of comment on it and elaborate on it and take us toward next steps with what we do with this new piece of truth we just found out. So to me, the discussion section is fun because you can kind of be more of yourself in this section, where you can kind of bring forth your ideas and make your comments that you'd like to, and also unload some stuff that maybe was building up along the research paper and disclose and disclaim anything you need. So this paper is, or this section I should say of the paper, is much more creative, and I think I kind of call it a mini therapy session. So after all that heavy lifting, it's kind of a way to vent and unload everything. So let's get after it. I'm going to move myself. Beep. And let's go over again just what kinds of stuff we write in the discussion section. Okay? So in the discussion section, there's a couple approaches that my students have used, and I'll talk through two of the main ones I find. Some people like to just go after their hypotheses and state the hypothesis again and then write about what they found. And then go on to the next hypothesis and state it and write what they found. And you can do that method, and that's fine. You can also kind of just start writing and weave your hypotheses in as you go, as they naturally come up in things you want to say. So one is more of a structured approach: hypothesis, what I found, hypothesis, what I found. Another one is more kind of a narrative approach, where you get to your hypothesis as the topic emerges in the things you want to say about your results and what you found. So one of these two approaches may feel more natural to you. So you can choose either way. There's lots of styles that come into the discussion section. As I grade discussions and conclusions, I'm just checking to make sure you have coverage on these things, not necessarily how it was done or the style you used, to just making sure it occurred. So you have a little bit more choice here into how you want to express yourself, which is kind of nice. So what you found versus what you expected to find. So essentially you need to tell me about were your hypotheses confirmed or not. So you can use that language: I confirm this hypothesis, or I did not find evidence to support my hypothesis. You can also say things like, I reject this hypothesis, or I fail to reject. That's more technical statistical language that you learn in a lot of stats classes. You can certainly use that language too. It's saying the same kind of a thing. Say it in the way you're most comfortable with, saying fail to reject, reject, or saying I confirmed, or I did not confirm this hypothesis. Either way, it'll work. But you need to tell me how your predictions, how your hypotheses did. How did they perform? It's okay to be wrong. You can make predictions that actually didn't come to fruition. Welcome to science. That's why we test things. You can say, you know what, actually none of my variables were significant and I feel like a total failure. You don't. It just means that what you tested and what you found out were two different things. Okay? So just because you had areas that were not significant, variables that didn't turn out the way you thought, doesn't mean you failed to get a finding. You still have a finding. You found out something. You found out that these things don't have a relationship. They don't tend to predict each other. That still is truth in the world that you can share and and comment on that's important. It is just as important to find out that these two things don't matter as it could be to find out that these things do matter, because it could tell us very useful information of great importance. So don't feel like if you have variables that aren't significant that you didn't find out anything. You did. Okay? You found out more about how that relationship works, or that the relationship is not present. Okay? So these are the kind of things you cover. You talk about predicted and unpredicted areas of significance. I didn't expect this to turn out the way I thought, and it's okay to comment in that way. Or this actually turned out to be negative. I actually thought it was going to be positive. It was negative. Or this had a lesser likelihood of happening rather than a greater one like I thought. So you get to kind of comment on how all of those results occurred. And then you want to write out what are the implications of your findings on the social behavior you are studying. So now that you know what you know, whether you predicted right or predicted wrong is inconsequential. What are the implications, okay? So these are some ways you can think about that. Did you maybe dispel a myth or a common notion? Maybe we assume these things work this way. Turns out there's no evidence for that. They're not statistically significant. So we need to rethink the way that we think about this. Our assumptions are wrong. You could say things like that. Right when people think it's this way, it's actually not. You can also talk about practical policy implications on your topic. You can say, this is how this information should be used. Maybe we need to change our training on something, or we need to focus on something more, or we need to maybe look at law or policy to incorporate more of what science tells us is actually going on in these situations. Maybe we need to utilize these results in a new approach to something. We can talk about that. So essentially you're answering the question, what can a person do with what they learned from your paper? What is the next step? What's the call to action? What's the thing that should happen after they're done? And then also, how does that inform our social life, our decisions, and our society? So we kind of take our truth in our study and we apply it to truth in the world. So then how do we take this information and make it useful? So these are all things to use to brainstorm, to come up with some language and things you'd like to say about what you found. You can also kind of use this as a way to tell me about how your study went. We kind of are going to go right into the next section for that. So you can talk a little bit about that here as well. So feel free to use this section for that. But these are basically the building blocks of a discussion section. You also want to use this section to maybe comment on your theory. How did your theory do? Do you think it works like this? Does your evidence, your results support your theoretical explanation of how it actually works? And then if it does, great. You want to reiterate that to your reader and make it obvious. If it doesn't, maybe you need to revise your theory a little bit and talk about how you would revise the theory. So this is kind of coming full circle. You can pull in parts of your literature review. You can say how you've now added to the research on this that gives us new information. We've resolved a debate in the field. We've replicated a study to get more definitive of an answer on this. You want to pull your theory back in and say, this is now what we know and whether it supports the theory or not. This is how this works, and this gives us evidence to show us how it works. So you want to pull these kind of loose ends and tie things up neatly and tightly in your discussion section so that we kind of have come to a resolution or a place of what your study found out and what it did. So that's essentially the components of a discussion section. Again, very creative, very fun to write, getting good closure, and hopefully you found this video helpful. You can brainstorm this with a peer or a colleague or a friend, and sometimes that gives you ideas of things you can recommend or write about in your study. So I wish you luck.